First of all, good evening. And we're going to be cohabiting Shomri tonight, I understand, with the NWCP. History is happening as we speak, okay? So as I was composing this during the week, this is half old stuff, half new stuff. So we'll see which way it goes. But we talked about all this stuff not that long ago. First of all, I always want to start by thanking Shobra and Muna for hosting us. Thank you very much. And we want to thank the Lehmann family for sponsoring the series, as always, the Lehmann. So tonight, as you can see, this is being sponsored by the Obersteins and the Birnbaums. Is Ken here? Not yet. He says, Obersteins and Birnbaums, as you see, in honor of those serving in Sahel and in honor of the lone soldiers who volunteered to serve, because their kids and family have to do with all that. To get down to brass tacks, there's a real Chad Gadya going on right now. We just don't know exactly which way it's going to go. And what I mean to say is like this. The Iranians, first of all, the Russians trained the Hamas to attack on October 7th, we know that, in Syria. And then the Iranians told the Hezbollah to shoot at Israel, as a result of which Israel eventually hit the Hamas harder than they figured they would be hit. Which I'm sorry, I said they're wrong. Hezbollah stronger than, including killing the leader. The images that I showed you of the rejoicing over the death of Nasrallah were in Idlib. Now you know where that is if you follow the news, all right? And so that's where these rebels busted out of. Because Hezbollah got weakened, the rebels attacked and looked at going to knock out the Assad government, which is going to result in the dispossession of Iran. And so somebody in Tehran is saying, whoops. That's my point. Is that Chad Gadya? Okay. Now, couldn't happen to another people, but that's a different story. So we're now in the, just to make this formal, we're talking about the series, Saturday Night Series 2024 to 2025, called A New Century But No Peace, The State of Israel and Jewish People 2000 to 2004. Tonight is lecture number 6 out of 12. The title is False-Analogies, The Conquest of Iraq and Its Aftermath, and other assorted goodies that are taking place in the Middle East. I'm going to try to locate this within a wider conceptual framework. As I said, the United States of America had no idea of the complexity of the political situation in Iraq when it undertook to topple the Saddam Hussein regime back in 2003. I don't know why this was so. The State Department and the other U.S. agencies are supposed to have Iraq experts, right? Now, you know, obviously they looked at it. Let's go to the first picture. They looked at Iraq like one simple map from the outside. It's a country. But they must have known, go to the next one. That's Iraq, right? Pay attention to that, because there's the Shias, there's the Sunnis, and so on. Here the Kurds. Look at this, right over here is the Kurdish part of Syria. We'll get back to that in a minute. That's today's Parsha. The story of Yaakov and Lavan, right? The story of Jacob and Lavan takes place in Kurdistan, in Mesopotamia, in what you call today the Kurdish part of Syria. Anyhow, if Iraq wants to see from the deep inside, let's go to the next one. 75 Shvatim, okay? Now, I don't think Bush and Cheney and company had any idea of all this, even though there must have been people in the U.S. government that know this. I mean, listen, if you and I know this, they must know this, but, you know, that's the way information sometimes is. It doesn't reach the top. I don't know. The U.S. military campaign was aimed at delivering a knockout blow to the regime by striking for Baghdad. So the war went like this. They launched it from Kuwait and all that in 2 columns, and they went for Baghdad because that's how you fight a conventional war. You capture the enemy's capital, command and control center, the Japanese surrender to MacArthur, so to speak. You know what I'm saying? That's how you fight you figure a war. Now, the conventional Iraqi army, the formal Iraqi army, was indeed defeated and smashed in this move. So notice the formal, regular, symmetrical warfare kind of worked. However, from the very first day of the American invasion, notice long before they hit Baghdad, from the day they started over here, Saddam had already called for guerrilla warfare from his already trained guerrillas. Listen to this closely. There's a separate group called the Fedayeen Saddam. That was a different army he formed, okay? These Fedayeen were never really wholly confronted by the US and British troops, and they never surrendered, okay? So in other words, as they go over here and fighting the Iraqi army, there are places where they find this kind of irregular militia. If you want, you could call it the SS, because that's what they were. And they're not giving in so easily, and they're all over the place in the country. Now, the US Army wasn't go-race them, as we say today, right? So it's very different than Germany and Japan. When Germany surrendered and when Japan surrendered, there was no such thing like die-hard fanatics holding out who are going to continue the struggle. They had a good old-fashioned conventional surrender. The war is over. Now, by the way, there were rumors, if you know anything about the history of World War II, that, and Eisenhower, let's go to the next one, was plenty afraid. They had werewolf. Right? The werewolf was supposed to be like the Fedayeen Saddam, the Nazi guys they'd hold out in the Alps and mountains and such places, and they would conduct terrorist warfare against the Allies, and no, it didn't happen, okay? Hitler at the end said, the heck with it, I'm just shooting myself. Goebbels said, I'm just shooting myself, and Gamarno. And same thing in Japan. There were groups that thought along these lines, but the Americans were so nice to everybody, it didn't make any sense. You see? They were shocked that they were treated well, and therefore it just never developed. It's just interesting, okay? But that doesn't mean it's going to be the same thing in Iraq. I want to be clear. This is why you have false analogies. You think because it's like this here, it's like this here. History is never the same. You learn lessons from history, but you have to apply those lessons to new situations. You understand? It's never the same. That's a rule, right? It's one of those rules that have no exceptions, right? It's never the same. Now, who was the Fedayeen Saddam? Here we have a very familiar pattern of brutal dictatorships around the world and throughout history in which they don't have an army, they have multiple armies and multiple security forces. That's how they do it. A normal country has a single army, period. And the army, in a normal country, serves the state, not the leader. That's the famous definition of Weber, who's the founder of modern sociology, of course, I know you know that. The state is the sole legitimate practitioner of physical force. We all agree with that. In a normal society, nobody can kill you except the city of Baltimore, the state of Maryland. No, I'm serious. The United States government. That's what we get, right? Now, there are laws governing how you do it. There's got to be a trial, this and that and the other. And the state can renounce capital punishment or they can accept capital punishment. But in a normal country, the right to violence is located in a single place. And that's the government, which the citizens in a normal place are supposed to have some say in how you run it. And so you don't want to shoot everybody with blonde hair, you know. But they're the ones that have the power. In a not normal country, multiple people have the power, right? To the degree that Baltimore, Maryland is a place where people other than the city can kill you, it's not a normal city. It's a fact, which is true, which is true. I mean, I say this with great sorrow. It's true. It should be. I can walk anywhere at any time of day or night, and the only people I have to worry about is breaking the law and get arrested by the police, and so for doing some outrageous crime, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's not like that, right? It's not like that. So that's the way a normal country is. But dictators are different, okay? So Lenin, Stalin, Hitler, dictators throughout history. Ivan the Terrible have multiple armies. You have the regular army, then you have your SS, your Gestapo, or your NKVD, or whatever they call in China, or anywhere else. You get it? And sometimes even more than that. So if one betrays you, you've got the other. And they actually like to have them all fighting each other, because then you're the one in control. So instead of normally a messy, that's the way countries are today. Believe me, Putin's got more than just the army and this kind of stuff. And the guy in China has got multiple things we've never heard of. And Iran has the Iranian army. They have the Revolutionary Guards. They have some other group, the Quds and this and that and the other. They say it's about Israel. Really, it's about internal control. Because you never know. Maybe some of these ideas about democracy, for example, may begin to infect the Iranian army. I'm not saying they are, but it could be. Don't worry. We got the other guys that are in there. If you know anything about the communist dictatorships in Eastern Europe, they always had the army, and then they have special party forces. You see? So that's what they had in Iraq. It really goes back to this. Defending Saddam started after the first war, the Schwarzkopf War. If you remember, after Schwarzkopf defeated the Iraqi army in 1981, it looked for a short time that Saddam was finished because spontaneous revolts broke out all over Iraq against Saddam. It wasn't that long ago. Right? We were still alive. Bush Sr., not Bush Jr. And with the defeat of the Iraqi army in 91, there were big riots and uprisings. Insurgencies broke up in the Shiite parts and in the Kurdish parts and other parts, and Saddam had a hard time suppressing this, okay? This is one of the reasons why Bush and Baker didn't go in, because they figured they're going to be lucky. You won't need the American army to actually invade and occupy Iraq. The Iraqis themselves will overthrow, right? The way Trump is talking right now about the situation in Syria. We don't want to have any soldiers going there. What happens over there? Get rid of Assad. Goodbye. You know, don't involve American soldiers. Well, there weren't revolts all over Iraq. No. So he said, but there were Shiite revolts, right? So again, look at this. This is where you had all the revolts against Saddam Hussein. And you also had up here, right? Not here. There's a reason. We'll talk about that in a second. You had Kurdish revolts, okay? It wasn't easy for the Iraqi army in 1991 to suppress the revolts. Eventually, it did very ruthlessly. It wasn't Pasha for them. As Assad has done and is doing, I wrote this last Sunday. Right? Currently, Russian aircraft, well, he did in 2011, right? The first round of the Syrian civil war. Because Russian aircraft dropped barrel bombs. They're still doing it. They're trying to. I saw the Israeli guy, Kedar, said, Israel should help, tonight, Israel should help the rebels, in his opinion, by shooting down the helicopters that are dropping barrel bombs on the rebels. In other words, the Russian-made Assad helicopters dropping, you know what a barrel bomb is? You don't hear about anybody going to the International Criminal Court. You know, that means you drop a bomb just full of stuff, and it blows up a whole neighborhood. Okay? Again, it's very funny. You don't hear any problems with this. Anyhow, there were Kurdish revolts. There are no marches. I mean, it's interesting. Do you see in the universities of the United States around the world, there are marches against those dropping barrel bombs and killing thousands of Arabs, men, women, children. It's a very interesting. Anyhow, the Kurds were protected at that time by the U.S., and that was their policy afterwards during the 90s under Clinton. So in other words, Saddam could do whatever he wanted over here, and he did. The Kurds, if you remember, the U.S. had no-fly zones and things like that. They shot down planes because, let's put it this way. Let's go to the next one. This was the big tension during the Clinton administration. Saddam kept wanting to try to take back Kurdistan because that's part of Iraq. And Clinton said, no, you're going to commit murder there and all the rest of it. It shouldn't be part of Iraq. Kurdistan said, can we declare independence on ourselves? And Clinton said, well, no, not that. Welcome to the messy Middle East. The Kurds, very much smart, from then till today, have always pointed out, we're pro-Israel. That gets them a lot of American support. Now, I'm not saying that's the only reason they're pro-Israel, because that's not true. But it is one of the big reasons, okay? At this moment, as we speak, the U.S. Army has bases protecting northeastern Syria, which is Kurdistan. So I'll show you later in the map, maybe. The U.S. Army, to this day, has lots of forces around the world. Isn't that strange? We have significant bases in Europe and Japan, now in the Emirates, places like that, I don't think the public necessarily knows or cares. It's very strange because usually you don't like foreign bases on your territory. But the Germans don't want them to go. The Italians don't want them to go from Livorno. Right? The Japanese don't want American bases in Japan. It's a little bit violation of the rules of history. Goes to show you, because they're more scared of the other guy than they are the American bases. Anyhow, but the Shiites is a different story. They were viciously against Israel, and they still are. I think I told you, they passed a law in the Shiite-dominated parliament of Iraq a couple months ago. If you say anything good about Israel, you're chayiv misa. If you say anything good about Israel, you're chayiv misa. Okay? And that's in the Shiite-dominated thing over there. So what's the result? Okay, you don't like Israel. There was no pressure on the American government to protect them. And so the U.S. just stood and watched while Saddam savaged the Shiites. When the rebellions were finally crushed, Saddam, this back in 91, realizing his army was not so great, determined to build its own SS, like Hitler, an auxiliary force blindly loyal to him, parallel to the army, and he called it the Fedayeen Saddam. In addition, in other words, to the regular Iraqi army. And so between 1991 and 2003, a lot of money was lavished on this Fedayeen Saddam. They had very intensive training. If you didn't pass the training course, you got killed. Right? The U.S. didn't pay attention to this, nor did you and I, which tells you something about our intelligence gathering. It's strange. We spend a fortune gathering information. That doesn't mean it percolates to the top. I mean, I'm not in the intelligence business. There are people in this audience that are, but I'm not going to point them out. It's him over there. But what do you call it? Everybody knows intelligence is part of intelligence gathering and analysis, but then it's got to reach the decision maker. Otherwise, no point. You see? During the 2003 war, the hardest fighting against the Americans and the British came not from the Iraqi army, but from the Fedayeen Saddam, who fought just like Hamas in Gaza, only they didn't have the tunnels. So in other words, schools, hospitals, mosques, with plenty of human shields, which is difficult for American troops to deal with. If you remember, right after October 7th, after the massacre, Biden sent a bunch of American generals to Israel, right away. And they said, we know you're going into Gaza. We've done this in Mosul and these other places. You're going to be dealing with human shields. You're going to be with hospitals. Plan your campaign right or else. Now, what they didn't know about was the tunnels, which makes things a lot worse. But in Iraq, it's still plenty bad if the terrorists, Fedayeen Saddam, those guys, are using children as shields so the American soldiers won't know what to do. Meanwhile, you kill them. You see? So whatever we in the United States Army learned, we learned the hard way. You get it? And that's how they do business in that part of the world. So many of the Fedayeen Saddam fought in urban contexts, and they fought to the death, all of which surprised the Americans. That the U.S. generals, if you remember General Franks, they poo-pooed all this, which was a mistake, and the GIs were the ones who had to pay the price. So as a result of the U.S. conventional attack, Saddam Hussein did fall from power, and he went into hiding, but all over Iraq, and particularly in the Sunni parts. So let's go back one. They're located, the group I'm talking about is not going to be here, because they hate them. During the decade or so, the Fedayeen Saddam, they're committing atrocities here, and here to the degree that they're able to. Not so much here, because the Americans kept them out. And so now that the government has fallen in Iraq, they're going to be fighting like crazy here, you understand, in the Sunni part. And so if you're an American located over here, it's not so bad. If you're an American located over here, it's not so bad. If you're located over here, it's bad. Bad. If you're located in Baghdad, which is 50-50, it's bad. That's why we always read, and we still read in the paper, a bomb blew up in a supermarket over here, a bomb blew up in a filling station there in Baghdad and such places, and so many people killed because you got two teams fighting each other. What else is new? I remember, so all over Iraq, whole groups of well-trained fighters with arsenals and ammo dumps all over the place, left there by Saddam, were in opposition, they were in a position to launch an asymmetrical insurgency against the USA and British regular forces with no warning, and the Americans and British had no idea who was attacking them. Honestly speaking, raise your hand if you remember who the insurgency was. I mean, we just heard on the news. We don't know who they are, right? I mean, we don't know who they are. I remember we heard about the insurgency, but who are they? And we could not comprehend. Why are they fighting us? We liberated them, and we're trying to set up a democracy. So they're trying to do a MacArthur in Japan, make the country better. So tomorrow, Iraq will be a prosperous place. You're the ones that are going to benefit. Like I say, what did we do when we occupied Germany? What did we do when we occupied Japan? It's the best thing ever happened to them. Remember that movie, the Peter Sellers, The Mouse That Roared? What was the whole point? Fight America, lose, and then you get the economy built up, right? Of course, in the crazy movie, Luxembourg won, but I'm just saying. So what's going on over here? Here's the problem. Democracy. Who benefits? Cui bono. I showed you there were 75 tribes. Which tribes were the ones who benefited from the Saddam regime? The Sunni Arab tribes of central Iraq, right? That's who Saddam comes from. He comes from a Tikriti tribe, it's part of the Sunni business, and so on and so forth, even though they fight each other and he did stuff to them also. But mostly speaking, if you were under the Saddam regime, who gets a government job? Who gets a teaching job? Who gets a this? Who gets a tax break? And all the rest of it. Not the Shiites, it's the Sunnis, because they're in power. That's how it works over there. If the other team got in power, as they are right now, it's going to go that way. So who's getting the jobs today in Iraq? A Shiite, right? They outnumber them. Who's getting this position? Who's getting a good job in the army? And so on and so forth. That's how it works over there. Who gets the export license? Who does not? You understand? Who gets to graduate from medical school? Who does not? They both have the same grades, right? That's how it works. You just got to understand. That's how it works in so many places. It works a little bit like that here. Now, these guys were going to lose their privileged positions with the fall of the Saddam regime. In their memory, so increasingly, Saddam was good times. We know he did bad stuff. That is true. But hey, had 2 cars. We had a nice house. My nephew was in medical school. My uncle was a lawyer. I mean, that's how people think. Even though the arbitrary nature of Saddam and his sons sometimes hurt them, because remember he had these 2 kook sons, and they would just go in the street and shoot somebody or rape somebody just for the heck of it. Oh, come on, you know that. But this was excused somehow, because like I said before, but times were good. We had a good parnasa. We had barbecues every Sunday. My daughter was able eventually to have a swimming pool. That's how people think, okay? Under the Americans are introducing democracy. Democracy is those who have the most vote wins. Well, the Sunnis aren't the most votes. The Shiites are the most votes. Well, the Americans don't understand it. Don't you want democracy? Here we come to some very important observations regarding democracy, which has implications for Israel and increasing for the West, and it's going to be up any day this coming week on the news in Syria. Right? Remember that word, democracy. Democracy was thought up for homogeneous contexts and for such contexts. It was thought up in homogeneous contexts and for homogeneous contexts. In other words, where'd they come up with modern notions of democracy? Western Europe, England, France, America. These are homogeneous. It's all Englishmen, you see? It's all Frenchmen. And the 13 colonies is all Americans. And even though not everybody came from exactly the same neighborhood, in England they all speak English. In America they all speak English. In France they all speak French. And so the question of democracy becomes, what is the best way, since we're all one group, to govern ourselves? So one guy dictated over everybody else. Should there be other ways? And eventually they came with the ideas, let's have votes and democratic rights. For all of us English, for all of us British, for all of us French, if they could do that. Eventually for all of us Germans, because we're all in the same group. So we all want the same thing. We just had different ideas how to get there. We're all Americans. Let's go back 100 years ago. They're all Americans. All Americans are white Anglo-Saxon, Protestant, dominated, and there's a black minority, and that's all there was at that time. So question is, what's the best way to go for America? Socialism, capitalism, isolationism, interventionism. These are fair questions that could be debated. But the idea by everybody is the same thing. We want what's best for the country. This is a machlokes, what gives it best for the country. So really, all joking aside, a Democrat today says like this: you Republicans are too dumb to realize I'm actually working for you. Right? It'll be better for you. Same thing Republicans say, you Democrats are too dumb to realize our policies will actually benefit you. You just don't see it. You understand? That's what we call democracy. We have political debates over how the conduct of policy should be. Now, it presumes everyone is the same, subscribes to the same identity. We're all Americans, we're all British, we're all Norwegians, we're all Swedish. The only question is, what's the best way for members of that group to govern themselves? The basis of democracy in such contexts, is the willing surrender of power according to certain rules. That's why Biden made it a big deal to meet with Trump right after the election, not getting into the January 6th business. He won. We're going to have a normal transfer of constitutional power, January 20th, and showing. Right? And Biden is saying like this, and that's best for the country. Now, if we win the next time, you got to do the same thing. I get it. All right? And we all know Trump is the only president that had issues with that. Right? With January 6th. There's never been a president that challenged that. Okay? But it didn't stop him from getting reelected. You see? Now, we've had many times in American history, interesting, where presidential candidates said, I think I won, but I'm not going to contest it for the national good. Nixon did in 1960. He really won. They just cheated in Chicago, if you remember, Mayor Daley. Al Gore, I think, probably really won, although it came down to a few votes, in Florida. Just the Supreme Court ruled the other way. And he said, okay, and that's what it is, that's what it is. But willing surrender of power is based on what I call the Torah Shabbat Peh of democracy. In other words, strictly speaking, whoever has the most votes gets the power. Well, why can't I use that power? Now that I got the most votes, I hereby declare you all Chayiv Misa. I'll kill the opposition. So I won't have to worry next time, people vote against me because they'll all be dead. We have the right to do it. We have the power. We have the majority. If the majority, if counting noses and having more noses makes you have that right, okay? But that's not how democracy as you and I understand it. The way it evolved was, we will surrender power to you in the future just like you surrendered power to us today. In other words, there are certain built-in rules which aren't enunciated, but which are taken for granted. That's why I say it's a Torah Shabbat Peh. You understand? Democracy is based on the idea there's certain rules. We played by those rules and I won. Next time we'll play by these rules and maybe you'll win the chess game. And maybe another time it'll be the other way around. And we're okay with that, you see? Because we realize in the larger picture, it's better to have that way of playing chess. Now, we won't kill you. We won't suppress free speech and all that. In other words, it's all about rules. The United States Constitution, at the end of the day, is a rule book. Right? The United States Constitution is not philosophical. Right? I know the preamble, but what's it all about? Executive, legislative, judiciary, rules, amendments. It's about rules. Okay? It's about rules. Can the Congress do this? Can the Congress not do that? Can the president do this? This is not that. It fits whether you want to run communism, socialism, capitalism, and it's about rules, okay? Well, guess what? It requires a great deal of enlightenment to follow that. The recognition that surrendering powers after elections is in everyone's enlightened self-interest. It means recognizing its value even when it produces disappointing results. For example, democracy, how should I put it? All these criminals get away with crimes because of our legal system. That's why I say you can't go everywhere in Baltimore. Can't go anywhere in the United States. we need a dictator. Just round up all these guys and kill them. Can't do that. Why not? Not democratic. We have rules of law. The bad guys hire big lawyers and get out of it. It's a shame. Like that. If a dictator came in, he'd kill all the bad guys without a trial, and you could walk anywhere in town any time of the night. Remember the famous, line of Genghis Khan? He said, when I was ruling, a virgin with a sack of gold could walk on a dark road at any time at night, which was true, because he killed everybody, right? So there wouldn't be any crime. Now, I'm going to tell you something. Many societies in history, including today, say we're willing to make that trade. If you let me live my life, and there's law and order, meaning I can go anywhere, and I have a decent economy and all the rest of it, you handle all the politics. I don't need to do that. Listen, I got a life. I'm a rabbi in a shul. I give talks. I teach in college. I have a family. We have a birthday party. I can go celebrate my life. I don't need to go and weigh in on all the national issues and things like that. Right? That's what you call privileging order over the democracy. Many countries do that. Authoritarian regimes, they're called. Problem, of course, is it always slips eventually into a harsh dictatorship. But I get it. Listen, I think you know this. China in the 19th century, because of the British, got a big drug problem. They pushed into opium. It's a sad episode in British history. And the opium was all over the place. How did Mao Zedong get rid of it? He killed on it 7, 8, 9 million people. That's all. You had any shaykhs to the drug thing whatsoever, whether you're an innocent bystander or anything or user once, they shot you. Like 10 million, a lot of the people. Well, guess what? No more drugs. You understand? So that's one way of dealing with it. But there's no freedom with its benefits. Now, this has never been the way, that system of thinking in the Islamic world. I found something very interesting. There's a guy now who's made he's on video, YouTube. And I just discovered it last week. He's Israeli. I did a little homework. He's Israeli Druze. He's very Zionistic because he said like this, all my relatives in Syria say I want to live in Israel. He was in the Israeli army, all the rest of it. Now he lives in Germany. His name is Mansour Ashkar. Mansour Ashkar. If you look it up, you'll see it. And he actually did a whole long interview this past week with that guy, Elon something or other, who's an Israeli influencer. Elon Levy, is that right? And so it was very interesting. And he said, like I say, he's to the right of Menachem Begin. Let's get that straight. And he was in the Israeli army as an officer, and his parents were, and all this kind of stuff. And so he has an outsider's point of view, Israelis, Palestinians, Christians, because he's Druze. So Christians, Jews, Muslims, Jews, Christians, Muslims, they're all external to him. And he's making a point over here. They won his podcast, I guess he called, which is, what do you call it when it's a video, YouTube video? Podcast. It's a podcast, okay. So not only audio. So the point is, he said, listen, let me tell you something. Democracy can work with Christians, and it can work with Jews. It just doesn't work with Muslims. That's not their culture, you see? And he lives in the Middle East. Take a look at this.
My friend Lu'ai from Dubai said that in a recent interview that he had with Tzvi Chizkeli in Israel. And he said it very clearly that the concept of democracy does not naturally fit the Muslim world, the Arab world. It doesn't mean that it's a bad thing. It doesn't mean that democracy is the right solution for everyone. He's saying that culture actually wants and need a strong leader. They want to follow a strong leader, a moral leader that will bring them to a better future. And bringing them democracy is not necessarily, the good thing is it actually can cause way more destructions and damage in that culture. So democracy does not necessarily fit for everyone. Democracy does not need to be reviewed as the best, most perfect solution for everyone. It is a very good solution for the people, for Christians, and for Jews, and for Westerner people.
Right now, before you pat yourself on the back, Why? Among other reasons, there's a number of reasons. Islam is still a religiously fundamentalistic culture. Religious fundamentalism don't believe in democracy, right? Fundamentalist cultures are in principle opposed to democracy, including Jewish fundamentalism. Ask a Lubavitcher, who should run the world? Not democratically, the Rebbe. Ask a Litvak or someone, who should run the world? You know, this big rabbi or that big group of rabbis, because they know better for you than you know. You see? In a fundamentalist culture, the religious, you don't want democracy people can choose. What if they choose the wrong thing? You get it? There's right and wrong choices. Democracy works in a secular context in which there are no right and wrong choices. There are choices that we debated. But in a religious culture, you know this is right, you know this is wrong. So go say, in an Islamic country, people can vote to have gay marriage. It doesn't work. It doesn't make sense. You see? So the most you can hope for, and to tell you the truth, even Judaism, classic Jews like this. What is the Mashiach time? We'll have an enlightened ruler, a religiously enlightened ruler. But he'll lay down the law. You understand? It's not there'll be a democracy. What if I come in the time of Mashiach and say, I want to light a match on Saturday? No, you can't do that. That's what I want to do. No, you can't do that. So concepts that you and I have been raised in the American culture of democracy, which is based on the idea of majority. If 4 said this and 3 said that, then the 4 win. Doesn't make sense in religiously bound, especially religiously fundamentalist cultures. Because it's 4-3, doesn't make sense. Now, by the way, law works that way. Jewish law, Islamic, and the others. If you have a Beis Din or a court, if it's or the United States Supreme Court, if it's 4-3, you tuck a win. You see? But not in questions of political policy, of social policy. So that's one component of the problem with democracy in a place like Iraq, which the Americans and neocons especially, they walked into this blind as a bat, right? Oh, we're going to bring enlightenment and all this kind of stuff to them. Who, to the 75 tribes? What 75 tribes? Oh, right? Oh. So here's another problem. Democracy relies on individual voters voting their personal, not group views, as opposed to voting in a bloc. Democracy is supposed to be everybody's a citizen, he or she, and you make up your own mind, Trump or Kamala, right? On the other hand, if you have a block vote, then it says like this: because the Arabs, favor this, therefore you should vote for that. Or because the Jews favor this, the Jews should vote for that. So then, you're not exercising your individual opinion, you're just following whatever the group says. You see? Now, you end up with a situation that I'm talking about where blocks vote against each other and not individual citizens. This is very problematic for democracy because the theory of democracy, everybody votes by himself. Now, by the way, halacha l'maisa in America, a person can be a member of a group. It doesn't mean they necessarily vote that way, right? So there will be people part of this thing, and they'll vote not the way you thought. So there could be ultra-Orthodox Hasidic Jews who voted for Kamala, and you can have black and Latino voters who voted for Trump, whereupon they say, oh, how could you do that? But you still have, at the end of the day, this kind of an individual choice. But democracy is always problematic in multi-ethnic societies with different groups trying to dominate other groups. It works in a country where everybody's the same, so to speak. You identify the same. You may have class divisions, things of that nature. This is what we had for the last 150 years in the West. The Marxist attempt to break up the society into economic classes. And this should be manifested in political voting. So you remember of this kind of group, you can vote for this and this party. And for this group, vote for that party. To some degree, we had that in my time, still do. Why are you voting Democratic? FDR brought the New Deal, made Social Security. Johnson made the Medicare. I mean, I know that talk, right? That means you have to vote this and this candidate because this party, you get it? But it doesn't work. It works for a while, it doesn't work in the long run. It's supposed to be individual stuff, okay? Now, how are you going to do that with 75 tribes that all want to kill each other? Instead, you have in countries like Iraq and many countries around the world, like Hobbes. Let's go to them, right? Who said it's a war of everybody against everybody. What's the story with those 75 tribes? It's a war of everybody against everybody. What's going in Syria today? It's a war of everybody against everybody. Count me the different factions. You see? Right now, the rebels have coalesced for temporarily to knock out Assad. And then when that's over, they could have a very nice little civil war of their own. Yes or no? That's what happens. You see? So it's a Hobbes situation. It's a war of everybody against everybody. If Iraqi Shiites win elections, and they have more people, so they have more noses that ever they're going to win, they will use their power in Iraq against the Sunnis as a group. So how can you expect, why did the Americans think they're going to come and bring democracy, and the Sunnis, who is this big chalik in Iraq that you saw before in the map, are going to be okay with it? So they're voting not as a member of a polity, but as members of a different polity. You belong to the Sunnis, we belong to the Shiites. It's a zero-sum game, and you've been sticking us for years, which is true. Now it's our turn to stick it to you. Now it's our turn to stick it to you. This is how you divide and break up societies if you want to do that. Okay? A certain degree, you have this in Israel, right? Religious versus not religious, Arabs and this versus that. I mean, you have that potential. The basic model of society was the European model where everybody's sort of like the same. Not so push it, right? Not so push it. Now, if you're voting in the way I just described, it's not what we call democratic. This is an important insight. It is the problem today in the West with the Muslim immigration, because they're voting as a bloc. You understand? Now, and by the way, well, let me put it this way. This was not true of the Jews who moved to the United States of America 100 years ago. They wanted to thoroughly Americanize and not Balkanize. When they came here in great waves in the 1880s, 90s, and early 1900s, the Jews didn't say we're going to vote as a group, and they didn't want to identify. Now, religiously, they were separate. They knew that. But they wanted very much to integrate into American society at the political level. If anything, from a firm point of view, they did too good of a job in that. They threw the baby out with the bathwater. But nevertheless, you understand that it wasn't, we're coming here to America to set up a Jewish polity in the United States. The opposite. In fact, if you know the older, let's put it this way. There's two exceptions, but everybody else is different. The two exceptions is Squaretown and Satmar. Right? They make separate cities. Right? But they're not no-go zones for the police, like you have, for example, in Europe. So it's not really setting up a separate kingdom. It's a faux separate kingdom. And most people that I know don't want to live in Kiryas Ya'al. You understand? I'm just saying, it's not the model. Bloc voting in this country used to be disavowed by Jewish groups as undemocratic. They used to say there's no Jewish vote, there's just Jews who vote. Right? Rabbi Stephen Wise and the others said there's no Jewish vote, that's a bloc vote. That would be un-American. Then you'd be thinking like hyphenated American and all the rest of it. Some of us vote Democratic, some of us Republican, even though he himself was a big Democrat, but he's saying, you know, that's my personal choice. But in reality, you and I know, politicians have always courted the Jewish vote. In other words, every politician the last 100 years at least, in fact 150 years, has sort of identified ethnic blocs and going after them, including Abraham Lincoln. Okay? That time it was the Germans and the Irish. The Republicans could never get the Irish. That's how it went in those days. But what do you call it? There were kind of bloc in the groups, but you don't have to. And at least everybody paid lip service to the democratic ideal by denying that there's a bloc vote. Okay? So this is just interesting. Anyway, all the above is indicate how democracy does not work in multi-ethnic states, particularly when the different groups are trying to dominate each other or get better treatment. This is what took Austria-Hungary down. It's what takes all kind of multi-ethnic countries and it takes them down. This is particularly true in the 20th century, first in the Middle East, when the people who put together the modern state system in the Middle East, Woodrow Wilson, those guys, just stuck together pieces. I told you before, there's no Kurdistan because Wilson never heard of the Kurdistan, and they didn't get in at the right time and moment. You understand? You had to know who to lobby then and there. Chaim Weizmann was there. He knew how to lobby on behalf of the Zionists. The Kurds were not there. And so you had countries that were created for the first time ever, never existed before. There's never been in history a country called Syria. That's interesting what I just told you. There's been the land of Syria. There's never been a country called Syria. It was always part of some bigger thing. Really. Used to be under the Ottoman Turks, part of the Turkish Empire. Before that was under the Mamelukes, the Mamluk Empire. Before that was under Ayyubid Empire, that's Saladin. Before that it was Seljuk Turks. Before that it was part of the Caliphate, the Arab Empire. Before that it was part of the Eastern Roman Empire. Before that it was part of the General Roman Empire. Before that it was part of the Seleucid Empire. See where I'm going with this? Before that, it was part of Alexander the Great Empire. Before that, it was part of the Persian Empire, and so forth. You go back to the biblical times, you had Aram. Well, there were like 5 different states there. There's Aram Sova, Aram Narayan, Aram Damascus. King David fought them all, okay? Some of the Arams allied with David, some were against him, if you read the Tanakh. There was a country called Syria. And as sure as heck there was a country called Lebanon. There were the Phoenicians, in Tyre and in Sidon and a few places like that, but there wasn't a country called Lebanon. These are modern creations, never existed before. Same thing with Iraq. I could do the same thing. There was a country called Iraq. There was a kingdom of Sumeria and Acadia back in Abraham's time, this part of Iraq and that part of Iraq. After all, we're all Iraqis. Abraham Avinu come from Ur Kasdim. Ur Kasdim is like right near Kuwait, okay? So it was part of whatever empire at that time. The Babylonians, the Assyrians, which is the northern Iraq, had an empire and really stuck it to the Babylonians. Eventually, the Babylonians overthrew them and dominated the Syrian Empire for a while. Then they were taken over by the Persians, and then by Alexander, and then by Seleucids, and Chad Gadya. Yeah, eventually by and really most of the time taken over by the Iranians, what they call the Sasanian Persian Empire, and then by the Arabs, the Caliphate, and so on and so on. You see what I'm saying? No, there never was a country like that. In the 20th century, because of the politics of 1919, 1920, they said, let's create a country called Iraq. So first of all, the British could have access to the oil, and second of all, they had to give something to Prince Faisal since he backed Lawrence of Arabia against the Turks in the Arab Revolt. And his brother had to get a consolation prize called Jordan. So he took off, this is he took off a piece of Palestine mandate. They gave it to him as a kingdom. His great-grandson is still there. His great-grandson is still there. The first guy was Abdullah I. This guy's Abdullah II. You get it? So these are artificial countries. Egypt is not an artificial country. Mitzrayim has been there for a long time. That's not an artificial country. You get what I'm saying? But many countries that you and I think of are artificial countries. There never was a country called Turkey till the Turks took it over. It used to be the Byzantine Empire. There never in history was a country called Greece until the 1820s. There were the Greek little states that fought each other and all that kind of business. And Macedonia's a country. Never was a country called Greece. There was a territory called Greece, another country. Never was a country called Italy. You get what I'm saying? So in other words, countries come together or don't come together, however it happened. Here it was suddenly. And the problem is that, and by the way, Italy still has plenty of people who don't like the fact that they're all stuck together. There's whole groups in Italy. I've seen the T-shirts that said Northern Italy should break off from South Italy, have their own country, because we're paying all taxes go to South Italy, yeah. Whatever the case is, when it comes to the Middle East, they put together groups that do not like each other under one framework. For example, Syria or Iraq. The Sunnis don't like the Shiites. The Druze don't like either of them, and vice versa. The Kurds, the Alawites. And I'm sure I don't know them all. I'm not going to try to figure out all the 75 tribes in Iraq. But we know the Kurds and the Sunnis and the Shiites all hate each other. So isn't it be a smarter world if in 1920 they said, let's have one country called the Shiite, let's have another country called the Sunni, let's have a separate country, Kurds, and everybody will be happy. That didn't fit the British imperial plans. Same thing. Why can't we make the Druze have their own little Medina? The Kurds in northern Syria have their own Medina. The Shiites in southern Lebanon, that small area, have a small, tiny Medina, and so on and so forth. But it didn't fit the French imperial plans. You get it? Didn't fit the French imperial plans. Who made the border today, that we read out in the paper all the time, between Israel and Syria and Lebanon? That Metula is here and this is over there. A French captain and a British major in like 1923. They drew up the border lines, right? And for another 10 cents, if not for the fact that England and France were at rivals with each other, they could have put in up to the Litani River as part of Palestine. I don't know if that would be good for us or bad for it, but Israel would have plenty of water. You see? But it didn't work out like that. They made a horse trade. You get the Litani River, we get the Kinneret, with Syria having zero access to the Kinneret, even though Syria is up there. So the question of borders and ethnic groups and the others messes up so much the idea of having democracy. Because how can Syria can't have democracy? The majority vote, everybody's going to vote for their team. And if the Sunnis have the biggest team, the first rule they'll say is, Sunnis get all the jobs and the Shiites get no jobs. Because if the shoe was on the other foot, that's what you do to us. This is what he means, why I say it's hard to have democracy in this formula. To be perfectly honest, it's not easy in Israel also. But the Jews so far, for 75 years, have cultivated a democratic culture, and so we scream at each other, we cuss each other out. Look what they're doing to Netanyahu. Every day since the war started, he said this, he said that. You know, so far it holds. But there are many people in Israel who say it's so fragile, who knows what it'll be. And many people will tell you, if not for the October 7th attack, it was getting out of hand. They had 100,000 people on the highway and blocking the traffic. You know that. So democracy is not push it. That's what I'm trying to say. It's not push it. And what can I tell you? After World War II, you have this problem in Africa. After World War I, you had a problem in Middle East. And World War II, who made all these countries up? There never in history was a country called the Congo, Zaire. There never in history, because it wasn't. It was tribes. Never was a country called Angola. The Portuguese took it over, so then when the blacks took over from the Portuguese, it's now called Angola, and Mozambique, and Tanzania, and I don't know, Dahomey, and Cameroon, and this and that. These are European colonies, and the Europeans, to fit their own interests, decided to say, we'll stick this whole group together, even though it's a lot of tribes that fight each other. I'm doing the Middle East over here in this series, obviously. Somebody could get up and do a whole history of Africa since 1945. You see terrible things happen. Look, you know Rwanda and Burundi, right? Americans don't even know it exists, but you know there's a Holocaust over there. And there are plenty of other places where they could, they would. Most recently, you and I, because we live in this country, we heard of Darfur, right? You used to hear of Darfur. So that's why, recently, what happened? They busted up the Sudan, correct? Used to be one big country. Now they broke away and made southern Sudan. Why? Because in northern Sudan, they were coming and massacring everybody here. This is Darfur. You understand? Because these are the Muslim types and these are Christian tribes, all black. But A was killing B, and that's why B was resisting. And finally, after a lot of suffering and a lot of death, as I think you know, they finally, recently, got their own country. So why didn't they do it in the first place? No, because when they made the Sudan al-Khatkhil, it was a British colony, British thing, and the British were mainly focused on keeping it out of Egypt, because Egypt wanted to have one big Medina over here. See how these things go? It's not, how should I put it? You can't trust the news at 6:30. You know, can't trust CNN and all the rest of it. You have to go back in the background to understand. And who's got the time? Seriously, who has the time and the patience to do all this? Right? I mean, you know, most people have, I'm serious, all joking aside, you don't have the time and patience. By the way, let's go to East Timor in the Pacific, and let's go to the, northern Burma. You know, if you want to, you can drive yourself crazy. The world is focused on the Arab-Israeli conflict. They get a lot of, granular type of attention. Stuff goes on all over the world all the time. And what I'm pointing to is the problems of the colonial borders. Now, that doesn't make these people tzaddikim, but it means the idea of stuffing together different groups that don't like each other and expecting that'll work out is not pushing. So when they were in Iraq, it blew up in their face because the idea, I'm just trying to show you how dumb the American plan was. They're going to come over, take over the country, knock out Saddam Hussein, and then we'll introduce the United States of Iraq. And they'll have a constitution like we had, and everybody will be happy. And they would be happy. In other words, in a perfect world, if they would all agree to follow our rules, they would be happy. The Sunnis won't kill the Shiites, vice versa. Everybody get along, they respect each other's rights, and so on and so forth. It's in a perfect world. You understand? In a perfect world. And so, apply this to Israel and the Palestinians. Apply this to Israel and Palestinians. Do you think if the Arabs in Israel grew to 51%, they would hesitate to vote Israel out of existence? That's the long-term plan. If plan A doesn't work, and plan B doesn't work, and plan C doesn't work, then just wait it out. Eventually have so many, and you'll say, well, it's Democrat. Wait a minute. It's two different teams. It's two different identities. Democracy doesn't work in that way. Yes, it does. And the minute, so believe me, I'm not talking about those now who are marching and protesting that Israel altogether is illegitimate. It's a colonial settler enterprise based on the dispossession of indigenous peoples. I know the language. Say you're not like that. So you say, oh, well, darn it, so far the Jews have a majority, so they control the government and everything in Israel. But when they lose that, then they won't. And that'll be the ultimate hope. Matter of fact, what is the left-wing Israeli argument against the right wing? You want to annex the whole business, the whole West Bank. You'll have an Arab majority against Israel. They'll vote you out of existence the next day. They won't be given the vote. How are you going to do that? You say, well, that's apartheid. Well, it's not apartheid because this group as a group is against us as a group. You see how the arguments about the messiness of democracy are going to work? But on the other hand, it's not really questions of democracy because democracy means we're all one group. And we're just voting among ourselves. What's the best policy? If it's a zero-sum game, the winner gains everything, the loser loses everything. It's not democracy anymore. Who says democracy is majority rules and damn the consequences? Believe me, you'll be hearing this in the not-too-distant future, I'm sorry to say. So it's democracy in the narrow sense of counting noses, but it's not the classic definition of rotating power in a political commonality. Now, all this was unknown to the neocons and the U.S. military, who desired a democratic Iraq for the best of reasons, but could not understand the loathing of the three elements within Iraq for each other. Saddam regime had been Sunnis dominating and massacring the Shiites, who were more numerous. The Shiites did not want democracy, they wanted revenge. Now, Iran and its allies, Iran is next door, seeing a chance to create another Vietnam for America, agitated and facilitated a host of Sunnis from all over the Middle East to join insurgency. Watch this. Iran is Shiite. They don't like the Sunnis. But to stick it to America, they facilitated that these guys could come from Pakistan, Afghanistan, all this, cross through Iran, go into Iraq to attack the Americans. You see? And together they made hell for the United States. Why do they want the Sunnis? For the reasons I just said. Because really, the goal of the insurgency was not to restore democracy or nationalism to Iraq, for the Sunnis to become powerful enough to wipe out the Shiites and take over the Kurds. Have I confused you? Good. But you get the point. It's confusing. The Iranians helped facilitate the entry of large numbers of jihadists who are Sunnis, who planned one day to kill the Iranians. But meanwhile, let's kill the Americans who are being attacked by the Sunnis because the Sunnis are saying this democracy business is bad for us. So our goal is to kick the Americans out or kill them, then wipe out the Shiites, and rule the whole country with what's left over for us. That's the way it went. Rumsfeld didn't help because he completely misread the tea leaves. If you remember, he sent too few soldiers. He was wedded to this idea that nowadays you have small armies working sophisticatedly is better than large armies, which is just not true, as Israel has learned in the past year. Okay? Now, because it's the Middle East and their Ribono Shel Olam runs the world, there's exquisite irony here. Because Iran and Syria facilitated the entry of jihadis into Iraq. After all, that's the only way to enter. I mean, how do you get into Iraq to fight the Americans? Here's the map. Here's Iraq. Saudi Arabia is not bringing them in. Saudi Arabia was supporting the Americans. Jordan is not bringing them in. Syria, Iran. Get it? So you can enter Iraq as a jihadi this way or this way. It's hard for the Americans to control all that. It's not easy to control this part. So they didn't have to worry from this, and certainly not from Kuwait, but you have to worry from Iran and Syria. So you have to know a little bit of geography. Now, wait a second. This is a problem for Hamas today. Okay, do you understand? Hamas cannot be reinforced because of the geography. Look at this. As we all know, here's Israel. Here's the West Bank. Here's the Gaza Strip. This is Egypt. If somebody wants to come in right now, and I'm sure they do, they want to say, I want to support Hamas against the terrible Israelis. How do you get there? Israel has the whole place blockaded. They can't get in by the sea. They can't get in through Israel. The only way to get in is through Egypt, and Egypt's not helping. And anyway, Israel now controls the Philadelphia corridor, and so it can't be reinforced. You can't wage a successful asymmetrical warfare if you're not reinforced, if you don't have a safe base. Get it? Now, by the way, let me see over here. Hezbollah, incidentally, that is why they do tunnels. You try to equalize it by having the tunnel business. You understand? Here's the point. Hezbollah is different. Look at the border. They can get in from Syria, from Turkey, from here anywhere, and they can get in from Iran over here, sending them through Iraq, which is now Shiite, and into Syria. So anybody in the world who wants, if they feel like it, if they want to join the Hezbollah and fight the terrible Israelis, let's say you live in Pakistan, Afghanistan, one of those places, bavakasha. I've always been worried about this. It turns out, thank God, that since Hezbollah is a Shiite operation, these people around the world are mostly Sunnis. They don't want to join a Shiite army. You understand? Now, I didn't even take into account the Chad Gadya that I told you at the beginning, which is, since they dealt them a blow, now the Sunnis are coming down here and cutting them out. And I think I showed you the other day, and maybe I have it tonight, the heads, this is a week ago I mentioned this. I think I showed the video of Monty Kedar. Did I do that last week? Mordechai Kedar? I think so. You know who Mordechai Kedar is? He's this well-known Israeli Orientalist who knows Arabic and this kind of stuff. He's an expert in the region. He was a guest in your show, right? Shame on you. Now, a couple years ago, he was there telling me, he really was, because I remember Masha went there for that. Hold on for a second. He's losing his membership. But he's a Kippah Sruga guy, not a young man. And he's, I showed you last year, he spoke with Arafat, and he heard Arafat said this is all baloney, and therefore he switched. So he said that I am in Aniba Kesha, Imam Mordim. I'm in contact with the rebels, and they say they don't want to attack Israel. And this is what they told him, and this is what he's telling the Israeli news. And they hope one day there'll be an Israeli embassy in Damascus and in Beirut, and that there'll be a Lebanese embassy and a Syrian embassy in Jerusalem, not Tel Aviv. Okay, this is what I emphasize. Maybe I'll have it now. And therefore Israel should help them. They want to get Iran, and especially they want to wipe out Hezbollah. And they said, and when we finish them off in Syria, we're going into Lebanon to really clean it out. You understand? So nobody could figure on that. That's why I say the Rebbeinu Shalom runs the world in funny ways. If they really say what they're saying and they're not just fooling him, which is very possible because the Middle East, he can fool people, but you're seeing this now in the news as we see. This Al-Julani is saying, I want peace with Israel, just want to clean up Syria and all the rest of it. Now, he's not the only one, but you see how complex he gets. But they can get in from all over the place there if it's very dangerous. The Americans face this problem. Incidentally, this is why Hezbollah and Iran are scared of the progress. Again, I wrote this at the beginning of the week. He said, Hezbollah and Iran are scared at the progress of HTS in the Syrian civil war. So I think you know this, right? This is what the rebels had the other day when I pulled this down. As you know, They've gone down to here, right? At this moment, they're fighting in Damascus. And Israel, by the way, I don't know if they're acting smart or not. They're just very wary. Mordechai Kedar says Israel should help them shoot down the helicopters, the Russian helicopters that are bombing the rebels, whatever. Now, by the way, up here is the Kurds. The United States Army's there. Right? We have forces over there. They want to help. They want Israel to rescue them. You understand? But of course, Turkey doesn't want them to have a koach, because then they'll try to make a Kurdish state, which will include this chalik of Turkey. You see? Plus a chalik of Iraq, plus a chalik of Iran, which Israel says, halavai, welcome to the complexities of the Middle East. So Turkey is supporting the rebels against Assad, but they also want to fight at the same time the Kurds. Although the rebels say, this is what they say, we don't want to kill the Kurds, we just don't want them to form their own state. To have autonomy within Syria. Anyhow, who are these jihadists that I'm talking about? Meaning, who's the ones attacking Assad now? The same guys you brought into Iraq to fight the Americans? You created them. They've left the Iraqi war, the ones from Syria, have gone into Syria in 2011 with the Arab Spring to launch the Syrian civil war, which is going on as we speak. The current civil war, I mean, once they finished doing that, once they finished fighting the Americans, they came back into Syria, which under Pee-wee Sadat was an Iranian bastion, right? Assad Jr., you know. Now, the current civil war in Syria began in 2011, the Arab Spring, but it was like a Kerensky-type movement. The very beginning of the civil war, the uprising in Syria was a peaceful, saying we don't have jobs. Syria, again, it's so wonderful to see these ironies. The Syrian government under Assad Sr. wanted to recover the Golan Heights that Israel took in 73 and wipe out Israel if possible. But they said we don't have a big enough population. Therefore, they pushed the opposite of zero population growth. Have as many children as you can. And the population in Syria went like that. Problem is, there's no economy to match that, because so corrupt was Assad Sr. and Jr., they give their relatives all the monopolies, that instead of economic growth, you've had economic contraction. There's no country I know like that. Maybe there are, but you don't usually hear that. It's bad enough if there's 1% economic growth or stagnant. But to shrink, this is why I told you, in all seriousness, the common belief in the Middle East is that Assad Jr. and Assad Sr. are Mossad spies. I know it sounds funny, I get it, but I'm just trying to, no, because they say like this, who has benefited from the damage done to Syria in the last 50 years? Get it? Israel. Who else could make Syria shrink, mitpotates, be full of civil wars, murderously killing each other? It can only be the spy masters in Tel Aviv. And you can't tell them that's ridiculous, because they say, I know you have to say that, but really, you know, I do it differently. This is how it works in their mentality, okay? Now, the current civil war began in Syria in 2011, the Arab Spring, as a Kerensky-type movement, a peaceful protest, but the regime reacted to it by shooting and killing them and stuff like that. Because remember, Pee-wee is a ruthless Alawite, hated by the Sunnis majority, okay? So, you know, there's the numbers. This is Sunni, okay? Including the Kurds and this is all Sunni. This is the Alawites, okay? And then there's a weird type of Islam. These guys are actually nice, and the Jews. So wait a minute, these guys want to be ruled by a dictatorship of these guys? You understand? And they're so ruthless that they've done it for 50 years, since 1970. So you like that? As a result of this violence, the Sunni jihadists in 2011 left Iraq, where they were fighting the Americans, and went right back over that long, porous border here. So in other words, from 2003 to 2011, they were fighting here and killing everybody over here, the American occupation and the new government. Now in 2011, those from Syria crossing back into here to join the different rebel forces. That's where you had your ISIS types, your Daesh types, your all kind of different groups. That's why there are 100 different varieties of this. It's like Baskin Robbins. And so the result was this led to the death and dislocation of millions of Syrians, with Pee-wee hanging on thanks to Putin, Iran, and Hezbollah, as you and I know. Well, as we all know, this murderous trio, Putin, Iran, and Hezbollah, committed unbelievable atrocities in Syria, earning the undying hatred of the Sunnis, both jihadists and non-jihadists. This has made Iran and Hezbollah, and maybe all Shiites, enemy number one to all the Sunnis in Syria. I'll say it again. They were rejoicing in Syria when Israel killed Nasrallah. You saw that, handing out candies. In Idlib. Right? Why Idlib? That's the part that 2 months ago was not ruled by Assad. You get it? Because why? The Hezbollah, for example, came in there, they shechted whole towns. They killed children in front of parents and parents in front of children. They burned, they chopped people in half. In other words, they did all the things that the Hamas did to Israel on October 7th. They did that for years, not months. You say, why didn't I know that? Well, what can I tell you? Right? To be perfectly honest, it wasn't CNN, right? But it wasn't big. Like I said, you have the next Beis Yaakov graduation to go to, and you have the NWC banquet, and you have to go Rabbi Katz's thing on Saturday night. You got a life. But if you pay attention, this has been going on a long time, and if you're in Syria, you know it. And whoever's alive today means they didn't get to them, so their relatives were the ones that were mistreated. Okay? How much enmity? Well, first of all, they want to exterminate Hezbollah, both in Syria and in Lebanon. You see, Lebanon has been a subsidiary of all this, with the country living under Hezbollah's sword of Damocles, And you can, I think you know this. A lot of Lebanese, when they speak freely, they say, the Hezbollah is like a cancer here, right? Because they control the country. Hence, the Lebanese, in addition to the Syrians in Idlib, joy at the death of Nasrallah. Now, say it again. In Lebanon, right, there are plenty of people who were rejoicing, but they had to be more discreet because the Hezbollah hurt them over the death of the wicked witch. Now, so the Assad regime and its Iranian patrons and wire pullers created their own Sunni nemesis. That's my point. That's the Chag Gadya. They're the ones who created this force, the force of Iraq, now came down back to haunt them. And this past week, it looks like they may take Pee-wee down. It looks tonight, he might be gone. And if they do, Syria will then become a Sunni and not a Shiite base. So bye-bye Hezbollah. That's good for Israel. But if that happens, what happens next for Israel? It could go either way. The leader of HTS, Abu Jalani, says, I want peace with Israel. He actually had an interview with not only CNN, but with the Times of Israel, I saw. And he said what I just told you. He said, we've had enough fighting here, enough killing by the buckets. We want to rebuild the country, and we got nothing against Israel. We got against Iran. Now, I don't know how long that'll last in terms of the Palestine conflict. I mean, yeah, I get the dynamics there. This is what he's saying now, okay? And there's a logic over here. This is in Ivrit from Kedar, but listen to this for a second.
אני בקשר איתם.
וואלה.
כבר שנים. והתוכנית שלהם זה לחסל את אסד, את הנוכחות האיראנית בסוריה, את הנוכחות הפרו-איראנית בסוריה, כל המיליציות, ובוודאי חיזבאללה, ואת חיזבאללה לעקור מהשורש גם בלבנון. זו התוכנית שלהם.
ואז להרחיב את ישראל.
ואז, כך הם אומרים, לפחות היום, שגרירות ישראלית בדמשק, שגרירות ישראלית בביירות, שגרירות של סוריה ולבנון בירושלים. בירושלים.
בירושלים. מי אומר את זה? אני רוצה להבין רגע.
That's what I just told you. He said they want an Israeli embassy in Syria and Lebanon. They want their embassies in Yerushalayim, not in Tel Aviv, Yerushalayim. Let me tell you something. That's what they're saying. You never heard that from Arab before. Now, like you say, I don't know which way it's going to go. Obviously, in the Middle East, how would the Palestinians affect this? Will they say, how can you do this? This is treason us? Or will they say, you were backing Assad the whole time against us. You were backing Hezbollah against us. So you were supporting the people that were torturing us. You see how it could go in so many different ways? Okay? They might be lying, and they might attack Israel. In which case, uh-oh. It seems pretty clear they want to take down Iran. Right? because Iran is the headquarters of everything they hate. The HTS and company could do an Iran on Iran and encourage the Sunnis within Iran to rise up. You see, we forget. I'm not giving you the Shvatim. I'm giving you the ethnicity map. This is Iran. There are plenty of areas of Iran that are not Iranian. You get it? This is part of Iran. Kurds. They're next door to other Kurds. They like to have their own countries. There are plenty of people in Iran who are Azeris, Azerbaijanis, by ethnicity, and they hate the Iranians. There are plenty of people over here. And by the way, the Kurds and the Azeris are Sunni. The Baluchistan, if you've ever heard that word, well, what can I tell you? See, that's my point. You're too busy with Beis Yaakov graduations. Baluchistan has always been trying to break away, and they're Sunnis. Here are Arabs, like from this part, and Arabs. These Arabs are not Shiites, they're Sunnis. Then up here, you got more Kurds, and so on and so forth. So Iran is always saying, oh, Israel is an illegal state, and they're oppressing the minorities, all the rest of it. You are. No, we can't talk about that. By the way, you never see this in CNN. You never see this, anybody protesting about this. That's why it's all lies. You get it? The whole movement against Israel, all based on lies. But I don't have to tell that to you. So wait a minute. So the rebels now in Syria want to take over Syria, and Qatar will tell you this, take over Syria. If that happens and becomes a Sunni stronghold, they're going to go and try to do this in Iraq. They're going to try to overthrow the Shiite government in Iraq, which is supporting Iran, and make it one big Sunni bloc. Now, I don't know how that'll affect Israel. I don't know. But I'm not done. Then they're going to say like this. Now that we're up cheek and jowl to Iran, give this back, you imperialists. Right? Give this back, you imperialists. You're dominating foreign groups. And by the way, Pakistan doesn't like this either, because these are really a group by themselves. They're one of the people that didn't get satisfied in 1920 at the Woodrow Wilson Versailles Conference. So the Kurds and the Baluchis all say, hey, what about a country for us? And so on and so forth. By the way, I'm not even going into Iran proper. There's a different shvatim over there. We won't go into that. After all, I'm trying to keep this short. If they did this, so basically they would like to turn Iran into an Algeria. Meaning what? Terrorism, bombs, assassinations, right? That'll be interesting. By the way, how has Israel and the Mossad been able to take out guys in Tehran and all the rest of it like they did? You know, the other day they blew up the head of Hamas and all the rest of it. Israelis don't do it. They hire out these guys. They're happy to do it. As a matter of fact, they probably figure Israel's dumb. You're paying us to do what we want to do anyway. You follow? That's how it works. And so, for all I know, Israel might be hooked up with these guys. Very base. Because everybody's in a grievance. Why does everybody have a grievance? It's the Middle East. You see? Now you're trying, now let me get this straight. You want to introduce American democracy in that kind of framework? The only way you'd have American democracy, I'm serious now, if you broke everything up into 100 pieces, you just had Kurdistan, and you just had, the Druzistan, and just had Baluchistan, and within each little stand, where everybody's the same, you could have democracy. You could, at least theoretically, right? To have one big conglomerate doesn't work. Now, if they did this, what would take the place of the current Iranian regime? How would that act towards Israel? Now, I'm sure it's too late for me to put this on did you all see the video of that guy unfolding an Israeli flag in the middle of Tehran? When I'm finished this in a minute, you'll all Google Israeli unfolding. The guy did it right in the middle of the Times Square of Tehran. So, I don't know, maybe he's as a death wish. Let me put it this way. That's one way of doing it, committing suicide. What happens if HTS turns on Israel after it finishes Iran? Would the Saudis and the Gulf states turn on Israel once the Iranian threat is gone? What about Russia losing its strategic position in Syria? And then how would this affect Turkey? And what role will Donald play in all this? Trump, his foreign policy is going to Lubavitch. He's davening at the Ohel. He's even putting in a kvittel. Now I wonder, maybe it's as good. I want to tell you something. It's as good a foreign policy basis as anything we've had tonight. Okay? Now he's saying like this: I want to be Kamala. I want to be. Okay. But he might go. He's supposed to make a tefillah and then tear it up. And that's what they do over there. What can I tell you? He's even putting a stone on the top. Can you make this up? Right? Can you make this up? Now, by the way, when it comes to Israel, I think everybody saw this. Let's go to the next one. Trump was with the hostage families wearing a yarmulke. Let's go to the next one. Look at what he tweeted. Why am I wasting my time with history? Contemporary events are so improbable. No one in 10 years will believe this ever happened. On that note, good night.